Alrighty, welcome everyone. We're the Stimulus Connect. We're just getting started. My name is Liv. I'm going to be your moderator for today. I'm going to make a land acknowledgement on the land that I'm sitting on. A land acknowledgement, it involves making a statement recognizing the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, if you do not know what that is. So I am currently settled on the ancestral lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, colonially known as Ottawa. Today we'll be hearing from a panel of experts on the topic of thresholds and necessity trafficking. And the stimulus program is a collaboration between the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition and the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs. Welcome. We have a few planning committee members who are helping out in the background. We have Nick, who is doing simultaneous French to English interpretation for us. Thank you, Nick. Savannah will be moderating the chat. Hello, Savannah. Sanjana will be my partner and will be helping me with the Q&A. And Anne-Marie and Shay will be doing background tech and also watching the Q&A. Hello, everyone. Also, I would like to ask for you guys to please introduce yourself, your pronouns, and where you are. If you do not know what native land that you sit on, you can use the resource native-land.ca, and you can find out where you are located. So please introduce yourself to the chat. We actually have 280 people registered, so many people just coming out from across Canada. So yeah, let's see. And just a few housekeeping items. As always, please type your question into the Q&A. Remember that you can upvote your question. So if you see a question that you wanted to ask and you think that it is amazing, 100%, then you can upvote it and that question will probably be answered quicker. I will also be running a speakers list. So if you would like to ask your question directly to the panelists today, so you have the option to say your question out loud. If you would like to do that, and put your question in the Q&A and then raise your hand. And I will be moderating as well the people who raise their hands to ask questions. We will be bringing you into our Zoom room as well. While the previous question is going on, and you can choose whether or not you can have your video on, but we will need your audio. If you have any questions about any of that, feel free to ask any of the hosts or panelists as well. And also bear with us as we figure this out, because this is a new way that we'll be asking questions. Yeah, so I'm just looking at the chat right now. Hello, everyone. Hello, Shauna. Hello, Davis. Hello, Janetta. And yeah, so I think we have time to get started. We're gonna start with an opening question. So the first question is actually for Caitlin. First, can you introduce yourself and where you're from? And the question is, can you update us on the Ellis decision in British Columbia?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Caitlin Shane. I'm a staff lawyer of drug policy with Pivot Legal Society, which is on the stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples in so-called Vancouver. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the Ellis case, and I'll do my best to keep it relatively concise. The Ellis case is one that I've been working on with my colleague, Sarah Runyon, and our client, whose name is Tanya Ellis, won her case at the trial level, but it's a decision that was recently appealed by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. So we'll be bringing it before the BC Court of Appeal sometime this year. And in terms of what the case stands for, some of you may know that BC has some of the harshest sentencing ranges for people who deal drugs that contain fentanyl. So in 2017, there was a decision that came out of the Court of Appeal that basically said any person who deals drugs that contain fentanyl, which is obviously all drugs, should face 18 to 36 years of jail time. And that range was increased from 6 to 12 months, which is also extraordinarily high. So in our client's case, Ellis, we challenged that sentencing range. And our client is a single mother who lives in Campbell River. She acknowledges that she uses drugs herself and that she sells small amounts of drugs to a very small client base in Campbell River. She frequently tests her substances before she sells them, and she has trusting relationships with her small client base. In 2019, the RCMP took out an undercover operation on Tanya, and she ultimately pled guilty to 4 counts of trafficking in fentanyl. Just so you know, we're talking very small amounts, usually around 1.5 grams, and often it was cocaine cut with fentanyl, so not even pure fentanyl. In court, we argued that this sentencing range needs to be abolished. We said harsh sentencing penalties don't work. By throwing low-level dealers in jail, we're putting their lives and the lives of their clients at risk. These are sentencing ranges that fail to achieve Canada's stated goals of denunciation and deterrence. And we also argued that those goals, denunciation and deterrence, are outdated and don't have a place when we're considering drug offenses. So fortunately, the court agreed with us. Tanya's sentence was suspended. And ultimately, the court rejected the sentencing range for street-based dealers who traffic in fentanyl. So it is narrow. It's a good decision. Like any court decision, it has its flaws. But it's a start in recognizing that incarceration is not the solution. And also that particularly against a backdrop of an unregulated street supply, dealers aren't the villains that law enforcement and the court system makes them out to be. So stay tuned. That's going to be before the BC Court of Appeal sometime this year, and it may well go to the top court. We'll see. But that's the Ellis decision.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I do have a second question, and this one is for Colin. As we know, racialized communities are over-policed. How can the concept of necessity trafficking be in solidarity with racialized communities? And also, can you please introduce yourself and where you're from?
Hello, everybody. I'm Colin. I live in Toronto, he, him. Toronto is governed by Treaty 13, and I come here basically as a colonized person myself, coming from the island of Jamaica. So I have much dealings with the whole process of what colonization has meant, especially to the African, Caribbean, and Black communities. You know, one of the things is it's always challenging to try to really, you know, cement this sort of concept in the realities that we deal with. The fact of the matter is that in Ontario and in Canada overall, there are more Black people per percentage than just about any other group in jail for trafficking. And for many of the people who actually deal, they don't deal because they want to accumulate wealth. They're not going to become Bill Gates out of the process. You know, they're doing it so that they can survive, so that they can provide for their families, their friends. And we also know that the police, as they presently stand, are a very, very racist organization. I mean, you know, the roots of the whole roots of drugs have always had a racist connotation, from marijuana to the, you know, what they did in New York regarding heroin, you know, the carding. I myself have never had to put up with this, but the reality is this is the truth and harsh reality of people who are of color within the city and within Canada. So I hope that sort of answers your question. As to how it can be addressed, well, quite simply, by having thresholds and trafficking and minimizing the trafficking laws that we presently have. You know, we need, I mean, there's a difference between somebody trying to survive and somebody trying to make $1 billion, basically, is what it boils down to. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you so much, Colin. I have another question, and this one is for Garth. Can you please unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and the question is, can you please explain to us about what is going on with thresholds and Vancouver right now?
Hey, I'm Garth Mullins. I'm activist with the Drug User Liberation Front here in British Columbia and the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users. I'm the host of the Crackdown podcast, and my pronouns are he, him, and I'm on Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. Yeah, I just got off a call or a Zoom meeting with the province just before getting on here, and Caitlin was on there. A bunch of people were on there. And I mean, we're discussing this. We're having these conflicts about thresholds right now. We had them with the city of Vancouver. We're having them with the province of British Columbia. Both of those jurisdictions have Section 56 applications into Health Canada. That means they are both applying for Vancouver and BC respectively to be exempted from the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act for small amounts of drugs for people to possess, and right now it's like opioids, meth, stimulants, coke, rock, opioids, and we've had conflicts with both of those processes because we surveyed Vandu members, and people have reasonably big habits, and you're not just in possession of what you're about to do that hour. You might be stocking up. You might be buying for a friend. You might be going to a work camp up in the remote parts of British Columbia where you won't get access to anything for a week or two. And of course, the cops don't really like any of this. So therefore, very small thresholds or mandatory treatment or very sort of regressive kinds of ideas. So we sit on these committees and fight. And truly, the thresholds that are getting set or proposed are not because of like science, evidence, because we've surveyed, because we are finding out what drug users carry in our pockets. It's what the people in charge think is politically palatable. So they've all decided, and what's happened in both Vancouver and British Columbia in these discussions both is the threshold amounts were really decided behind closed doors, and they excluded the majority or a very big portion, depending on the drug, of people who are part of Vandu. We have about 3,000 members, and we have a pretty good idea now of how much people use. And we're just fighting for a decrim model that at least includes the people who have been proposing decrim in this city for the last generation. So yeah, that's why thresholds are important. They're a political battleground. The police want low thresholds. I mean, the police, I think, just want the drug war, but when they talk, they want low thresholds so they can still basically continue to be right up our asses and in the lives of people who use drugs all the time, and stop and search and all this stuff. And of course, we want high thresholds. I mean, we all want thresholds so high that they're just drugs are legal and and there's no drug war. But so that fight is going on in this kind of way. And thanks for inviting me to the panel.
Anytime, Garth. We love having you. Je veux échanger avec Sandhya parce qu'elle est dans Québec maintenant. Sandhya, qu'est-ce qui est le problème dans Québec pour le trafficking de nécessité et les thresholds?
Oui, alors, bien bonjour. Mon nom est Sandhya Vadlamodi. Je travaille pour l'Association des intervenants en dépendance du Québec. J'utilise le pronom « elle ». Et je me trouve actuellement en territoire autochtone non cédé. Je remercie la nation Ganyon-Gehaga, gardienne des terres et des eaux sur lesquelles je me trouve aujourd'hui, Tiohtià:ke, appelée de façon colonialiste Montréal. Alors, le problème, en fait, au Québec actuellement, et de façon un peu plus large que simplement les seuils ou le trafic de nécessité. On est à un point en ce moment où au Québec, le procureur général n'a pas accepté de partager les directives qui sont venues à l'été 2020, là, des directives du Service canadien des poursuites pénales et criminelles. Ces directives-là s'adressent aux procureurs fédéraux, mais à l'exception au Québec et au Nouveau-Brunswick, c'est le procureur général de la province qui choisit de les faire appliquer. En ce moment, au Québec, le procureur général n'a pas émis ces directives-là à l'intention des procureurs au Québec. Et malgré, en fait, plusieurs pressions qui ont été faites déjà par les organisations de la société civile, comme différentes associations d'usagers de drogue ou des associations liées à l'usage de substances comme l'AIDQ. Il y a également les directeurs nationaux de santé publique qui ont pris position pour demander au procureur général de se lancer dans l'exercice, mais depuis, bien, c'est lettre morte. Donc, qu'est-ce que le Québec attend? On se questionne. Est-ce que c'est une réticence face à ce changement-là? On n'en est pas certain parce que les procureurs au Québec ne peuvent aller de façon complètement divergente à l'encontre des directives, mais tout de même, ça ne devrait pas être la spécificité québécoise que de ne pas tenir compte de ces directives qui déjà sont un certain pas dans la bonne direction, mais qui sont encore assez éloignées de notre objectif qui a été bien défini dans la plateforme et pour lequel on est réunis aujourd'hui en lien avec le trafic de subsistance et les seuils.
Merci beaucoup, Sandia. I want to kind of just ask any of the panelists if they want to do this. Can someone give us a definition of necessity trafficking and thresholds? Whoever wants to unmute.
I'm happy to talk about threshold quantities if someone else wants to provide a definition for necessity trafficking. So threshold quantities are basically a substance quantity that distinguishes between simple possession or possession for one's own personal use and another offense, such as possession for the purposes of trafficking. So it's typically a very conflict-ridden concept, especially when we're discussing decriminalization models. We've seen that in Vancouver and BC, that it's really been the point on which different stakeholders very much disagree. So for instance, in British Columbia, the proposed threshold was 4.5 grams. So that means that any cumulative possession amount below that number is decriminalized, provided that it's in fact possession for one's own personal use. Any possession above that quantity may well be considered possession for the purposes of trafficking, not necessarily, but it's not decriminalized in the same way that below threshold amounts are. And there's different ways, to identify what an appropriate threshold quantity should be. Typically, they're not evidence-based, they're politically motivated. And the thresholds that we've seen proposed so far by jurisdictions contemplating decriminalization are far too low and don't actually reflect the amounts of substances that people are buying or using. So that's threshold quantities in a nutshell.
Thank you. Does anyone want to do, oh, Colin, perfect.
Sure, yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, necessity trafficking is just trafficking that somebody needs to do to maintain their own uses. Okay, it's as simple as that. For a lot of people, they don't have the funding. So you do is you traffic with your friends, and that way you can purchase your own, enough for your own use. I'm going to branch out though, because I'm also on the Toronto working group that just submitted our submission for the exemption to the Controlled Substances Act. And it was a very interesting experience. First of all, the police officer who was present was the head of the Toronto Drug Task Force. I mean, really, this is not the person to send. But the issue for us, and we've always maintained this, is that the drug community, the drug using community, is not one homogenous group. We are made up of so many different people, members from LGBTIQ, sex workers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these divergent groups have different uses and amounts that they will use depending on what they're doing, where they're going, et cetera, et cetera. So for example, I'm also a member of the Party and Play group as a gay brand. And trust me, when we're going to go party and play, we're not taking 1 gram worth of shit. You know what I mean? Because this is going to last us for the whole fucking weekend. And seriously, we want as much shit as we can get. That way nobody has to actually leave the damn apartment to come back and screw up our screwing. And there's no other way to put this. Same for sex workers. Many sex workers, I know especially for a lot of the young men, they are asked by their clients to purchase for their occasion. There are people who do it for fun. There are people who only purchase once, who can only purchase once when they get their welfare check or they do a DSP check. So, I mean, for the system to sit back to try to dictate what and when we are going to use is absolutely pure fuckery. I mean, it's a Jamaican word I love, and I think it's wonderful. It explains it all. We need to continue to push, and I think, as Caitlin said, for the maximum. I personally think there should be no limits. There should be no threshold. But I'm also realistic because this is a society that we're in. Okay, we're not going to win by getting no thresholds. But what we can do, I believe, is to push for as high a quantity as we can. And I think it was the committee, the drug committee, who actually recommended that if any thresholds are going to be created, then that needs to call for a commission of people representing all drug user groups across Canada to set those limits based on location, place, city, urban, rural, and that way maybe we can get something that's actually decent and workable. Thank you.
No problem. That was amazing, Colin. I would like to go to, I have a question for Caitlin from Louis Letellier. In the Ellis case, did you mention the guideline issued in August of 2020 from the Public Prosecution Service of Canada related to possessions of controlled substances?
So, I mean, in my view, the guidelines from the Public Prosecution Services of Canada, which for those who don't know, basically direct Crown prosecutors to not pursue charges of simple possession, except in something like the most serious cases. In our view, that doesn't go nearly far enough because a police officer or law enforcement with a particular will can basically justify most simple possession offenses if they want to, using any of the very broad criteria that are listed under that prosecution guideline. In my view, you need to repeal the provision preventing or prohibiting simple possession full stop, rather than all of these half measures that still allow police to retain discretion to continue violence against people who use drugs. So that aside, we did use that guideline as evidence that Canada is claiming to take a different approach to simple possession, and it's somewhat evidenced in policies and procedures that are being passed and implemented at this time. So that part of our argument was, these goals of denunciation and deterrence and incarceration are not only ungrounded and failing, they're also completely out of step with the tone that Canada is alleging to take at this time. It's hypocritical and contradictory to say we're taking a public health approach, we're getting rid of a criminal justice system at the same time as we maintain all of these half measures that continue to do violence upon people who use drugs. So we did use it as evidence of a changing tide, but we also said, we need to go further.
That's awesome. And I just saw that that was exactly the answer that he wanted to hear. So perfect. Thank you, Caitlin. Je vais faire une autre question pour Sandia maintenant. Ça, c'est de Michel Lancelette. Pourquoi se contenter d'une décriminalisation de la possession simple lorsqu'on sait qu'il excusez-moi. Pourquoi se contenter d'une décriminalisation de la possession simple lorsqu'on sait qu'il est primordial d'avoir un approvisionnement sécuritaire à un juste prix et ou gratuit lorsque nécessaire?
Oui, bien sûr, on souhaite que cet approvisionnement-là plus sécuritaire soit disponible et accessible à tous, en fait, dans un avenir le plus proche possible. Entre-temps, la décriminalisation permet quand même de faire certaines avancées en ce sens. C'est-à-dire que de développer une approche qui permet en fait la possession simple de l'ensemble des drogues, ben, permet également de faire des avancées dans cette dans l'approche qui permet de prendre en compte les droits des personnes et la santé. Donc, on peut offrir dans ce contexte-là aussi un accès à des substances à travers différents réseaux. Le réseau de la santé, par exemple, offre maintenant un approvisionnement plus sécuritaire dans différentes situations. Alors, ce n'est pas une panacée, la décriminalisation, mais c'est un pas vers l'adoption d'une approche basée sur les droits et la santé plutôt que sur la punition.
C'est pour ça. Merci, Sandia. I have another question for Garth. I've been told that you have a certain disdain for the word cumulative. Can you please explain that and go further into how that relates to thresholds and necessity trafficking?
Yeah, we've been fighting for decriminalization and safe supply in Vancouver and British Columbia since the first time I went to a meeting on this was like 1998, I think. So for a long time. Sometimes the politicians talk around here like this stuff already exists, but it doesn't. So, but what I've noticed over my lifetime is that people used to just be very honest about how much they hated drug users and didn't care if we died and all that stuff. And now they talk like they're very caring, social workers or something. They all sort of have this very nice, soft way of speaking. But the fuckery is still there. And sometimes you have to look for it in the small print. And in this particular case, cumulative was the way that they did it. So we were, discussing and trying to work through the decriminalization proposal that BC sent to Health Canada on November 1st of 2021. And Vandu was pretty clear about what thresholds we would need as a minimum. My starting point was like, just like what Colin was saying, like we didn't want any thresholds, but we also came to that same point where we had to realize, okay, we might get nothing at all, or the police thresholds might carry the day. So, we had surveyed our membership. We realized what we needed as a very minimum threshold. And when the provincial minister of mental health and addictions sort of said 4.5 grams of heroin or coke or crack or fentanyl or meth or whatever, we thought, we could probably live with that. We might be able to live with that just for the purposes of staying at the table and fighting another day. And so we were, I was talking to the board, we were talking around Vandu, like maybe this is okay, because we got fucked really bad by the city and the thresholds were too low and they did it at the 11th hour. But here the province was coming forward, and then they went and had meetings by themselves. They introduced the word cumulative. So it wasn't like that you could carry 4.5 grams of heroin and 4.5 grams of coke. It was like all the drugs you would have together had to add up to 4.5. And our data didn't support that. Like our members carried more than that. And so adding that word cumulative, instead of being able to have 4 piles of drugs, you could only have one, and it could only be that high. That's what cumulative means. They just slipped that word in there, and then they rushed the thing into into submission. And we asked for little time to talk about it. We asked for, can you take that word back out and just be silent on it? And they were just like hardcore, no way. And that's like a dodgy little move there to bring a group of people together. They open up the meetings with like really nice, like let's all share, let's all have good spirit to each other, blah blah blah, almost like moment of meditation they want at the beginning, but really it's just the same old sharpened stick that they're holding. So I always say that's a really important thing to watch out for, because some of us have been around long enough, and most drug users have a pretty good bullshit detector, but they come at some people like they're their friends, and some of us have never heard a person in power talking with friendly words before. So it can really do a number on your head. It's like a gaslighting offensive. And that little word there is just our most recent example of this. And I think that people have realized this kind of politics is really effective. Like British Columbia has this reputation of being a world leader around the world, like on harm reduction and all this stuff. And really, it's kind of fake. We kind of just talked a good game of shit from the legislature, and really like, even the safe injection sites promised haven't rolled out. So yeah, it's like as a drug user, then you have to watch the fine print, because your enemy talks different now. Your enemy tries to talk like your friend.
That's so true. And so there was also a follow-up, and it was like, in exploring the no threshold model for Vancouver, was there ever a concern about not having thresholds could open up the door for increased trafficking charges? From Anonymous.
Yeah. We have struggled with this, like Caitlin said. The proposals in Vancouver and British Columbia are all about personal possession. So if the police figure out that you're trafficking, like this subsistence trafficking or necessary trafficking or anything, that's not on the table. They are not interested in that. They still want to go after the dealers. In fact, that seems to be the new line amongst police forces everywhere. And I noticed in the election last year, the federal election, party platforms, almost all parties, I think, talked about focusing on the dealers. So it's like they want to split us off. Like there's these drug users, which maybe we'll leave you aside, but the dealers we want to get. And what really we're all one and the same, right? Like, I don't know, this girl for years and years, and I used to go score for us and bring it back, so that I'm by their definition, a dealer, and lots of us deal just to get by. So like that, they sort of haven't allowed that into the conversation really. I think we got to be, I think that's why I'm so excited about this panel, is because we got to defend necessary dealing. And I'd even say that we have to think about challenging the idea of police going after any kind of dealing. Obviously, we want a regulated, safe supply. I don't want to always have to rely on an unregulated underground market to get drugs. But if we have decriminalization, but the police focus their resources on dealers, even dealers at the top of the pyramid, which they don't tend to do, but imagine just for the thought experiment that they did, you're engaging the iron law of prohibition. You're pouring gasoline onto that process. You're basically incentivizing all of the people who are up the food chain in the production and distribution of illegal drugs to find something that's stronger and smaller and quicker. And the more police put the squeeze on people, the worse things get. I mean, I see it all the time. I saw last summer, there was a big drug bust in BC. They had drugs on the table, press conference and everything like that. And it took 2 days between that press conference and for there to be real fucking violence on the 300 block of East Hastings in Vancouver. And you could just draw a direct line from police doing this operation to like the lives becoming noticeably miserable for everybody else and people fighting over the vacuum that's left. So this going after the dealers, necessary or otherwise, is not good for us. It maybe makes good TV and good like propaganda and stuff like that. But really and we find ourselves in these spaces where we have to make these midpoint arguments, like we don't want thresholds, but then we have to argue for a high threshold. We want an end to the drug war and not an illegal market at all. We just want regulated legal drugs, but we have to argue about backing criminalization off of certain segments. So it's just, to me, it's difficult, but you see that the police in every instance use this as an excuse to attack poor and Black and Indigenous communities every time. And so like taking those excuses out of their hand or limiting those excuses is really important. People often say, oh, decriminalization won't stop the deaths. You need safe supply for that. And there's a lot of truth to that. But getting cops out of people's lives and out of people's communities is fucking huge. And we should never underestimate what a revolutionary change that would be. Cops are going to find other ways to fuck with people, guaranteed. But taking this big one that they've been using against us for decades away from them, that's a big win for us. Thanks.
No problem. On va aller à Sandia. Elle a un commentaire pour nous.
Oui, en fait, en lien, en fait, avec les seuils, les quantités acceptées et en fait, tous les propos là, que Garth vient de nous partager, en lien avec l'idée d'éloigner là, un peu la sécurité publique de la question de l'usage de drogue et que dans la réflexion en lien avec les seuils acceptés, on a le fait que la possession d'un montant supérieur au seuil ne devrait pas être automatiquement ou présumément associé déjà à la possession à des fins de trafic et que ce serait, dans le fond, à la poursuite d'en faire la preuve et qui, autrement, l'exemption devrait s'appliquer. Alors, en ce sens-là, je pense que ça vient aussi que ça vient donner, en fait, des leviers supplémentaires pour éloigner, là, éloigner de toute démarche judiciaire là, la question de possession et incidemment de trafic là, également.
Merci, Sandia. On a also, we have also a poll going up. It's a 6-question anonymous poll that we want people to fill out just to get your position. I would also like to say hello to everyone who's joining us from internationally right now. Let me see. We have people from across Canada, or so-called Canada, England, Burundi, and the US, and hello to everyone from the Drug Policy Alliance as well. Okay, perfect. We're gonna go now to Alejandro or Alex. This is a question that's probably gonna be very directed at Colin because it's Toronto based. So my name is Alejandro from Toronto East Downtown. Our current mayor, John Tory, has made remarks about drug dealers, referring them as dangerous criminals living in the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, TCHC. This made access to housing for drug suppliers more difficult. How can I, an advocate for low-income families, address this topic and address this issue and explain necessity trafficking in a more objective way with within a hostile rhetoric made by opportunist politicians preying on people's fears?
Okay, so I can tell you certain things that are going to happen in Toronto Community Housing is that Toronto Community Housing, the actual body, has taken, the Board of Governors have taken a different tact from what John Tory has said. We're going to be having a say, most Toronto Community Housing Corporation buildings are going to be having a new what's called a hub, which is going to include an overdose prevention site, as well as a place for people to pick up substances. The issue relating to, however, people who are as drug suppliers, there are two things to that. One is one of the concerns that a lot of the people who are coming to sell drugs did not live in the community and actually came from out of town, and were therefore bringing in some violence acquainted with that, etc., etc. This Toronto Community Housing Corporation is going to address that by restricting those people and therefore possibly opening it up for local sellers who will be linked to one of the community health centers. So that's what's going to be happening there. The other thing you could possibly do if you want to advocate is to write really strong letters to our city councillors who are on board with a lot of the changes that are coming, as well as his name is Doug Gord Tanner, and he's in charge of shelters, homelessness, and all the rest for the city of Toronto. So you can advocate for it. We are working on this. There is also going to be in a lot of these, in a lot of the Toronto community housing hubs, there are also going to be harm reduction supplies being handed out on a regular basis. So there is change coming. I think the other thing that I want to touch on, and I think a number of other people have touched on this, is, you know, when it comes to trying to decide or settle on what is a threshold for anybody, it's unrealistic. It is unrealistic. You cannot define thresholds. So we need to keep pushing for no thresholds. But as I said, we also need to be realistic about what we can and cannot do in the present political system that we're in. And that's not going to change, you know, it's not. But the other thing that I do want to point out is that, I mean, when weed was illegal and all the black guys were dealing weed, you know, they were all getting arrested. What happened? Weed became legal. How many black people have you seen running a fucking cannabis store? I mean, seriously. So they cannot even make that adjustment to go from what is legal to illegal, what is illegal to illegal, because, I mean, seriously, you think a bank's going to give them the funding for them to open up a fucking cannabis store? No. So no matter which way you go, people of color are fucked. Okay, we're fucked when it's illegal, and we're fucked when it's legal. Look, I am gay, black, and I do drugs. I got 3 strikes going against my ass. You know what I mean? But this is the reality we face. So it's really incumbent, I think, for allyship, for us to get this, to get this sort of policies changed. And that allyship is going to come from people who are not black, who are not people of color. So I think it's key that you step up with us and, you know, fight this battle with us, basically is what I'm saying. Thank you.
No problem. That was amazing. It's so true that we need to use our privilege to uplift the voices of who don't get heard at all and who are at most at risk by colonial violence, for sure. Je veux, Sandhya, est-ce que tu as un commentaire?
Ben oui, je pourrais faire un commentaire qui est peut-être aussi en lien avec une des questions qui est posée en français dans le chat, qui parle également des revendeurs de subsistance qui doivent s'approvisionner quelque part. Et qu'est-ce qu'on pense d'un modèle, en fait, qui pourrait inclure les revendeurs dans un modèle plus légalisé ou contrôlé. Je pense que, comme Colin vient de le dire, évidemment, le plus on va inclure les personnes concernées et au premier plan, les personnes racisées, les personnes des communautés autochtones, inuits, les personnes qui sont déjà impliquées là, dans le réseau, en fait, d'approvisionnement, de vente de drogue pour développer un modèle qui va également profiter à ces personnes-là. Donc, on parle de réparer les impacts épouvantables de toute la prohibition et impliquer les personnes pour développer un modèle qui est cohérent et qui est profitable à l'ensemble de ces communautés. C'est tout un défi, mais ça fait partie, je pense, des visées centrales que l'on a ensemble un peu partout de coast to coast au Canada. Et c'est justement en s'alliant et en mettant de l'avant à la fois par les paroles et par les actes ce type de principes qu'on va faire de réelles avancées. On avait des espoirs liés au cannabis dans le cadre de la légalisation et il y a des démarches qui ont été tentées au Québec aussi pour inclure dans le modèle de distribution là, les personnes qui étaient déjà impliquées. Ça ne s'est pas matérialisé, mais ce sont des travaux qui ont encore cours et on souhaite que dans une révision du cadre légal, ben, on puisse progresser.
Ça, c'est vrai. Et I want to go to Caitlin next, actually. If I saw Alex Bezos has a question. In terms of threshold limits, would the threshold limits protect in any way against PPT charges below that threshold? Example, police say that they saw someone do a hand-to-hand transaction. I'm thinking in reference to the story about Simona Marsh.
Sure, yeah, I can answer that. Thanks, Alex. It's a really good question. And for those that are kind of confused about how threshold quantities work, you're not alone. This is a question that comes up frequently, and it is about whether offenses other than possession for personal use, when we're talking about below threshold quantities, will other offenses be protected or decriminalized when we're talking about below threshold quantities? And the answer is, at least in Vancouver and BC, I mean, I suppose it could depend on the jurisdiction and what the aim is, but in BC and Vancouver's proposed models, only possession for personal use of below threshold quantities is decriminalized. If you are engaged in trafficking or passing off a substance, even when that substance is below threshold, you are not protected. It is only for personal use. So a lot of people think that, you know, all activities when we're talking about below threshold quantities are decriminalized. That's not the case, at least here in BC and Vancouver. It would be only simple possession. BC has made some concessions in its application to say that there should be some legal protection when we're talking about informal splitting and sharing of substances, but only where there's no profit motive. So again, and this is really, I think, the theme of this panel is we have to be so vigilant when we're talking about advocating for decriminalization that we don't end up incentivizing police and justifying a crackdown on dealers, because that is always, it's the whack-a-mole that we see in every area of our advocacy. We have to be so vigilant that we're not having our words misconstrued to say, okay, yes, we're gonna be lenient on drug user victims and crack down on drug dealer villains. It's that same dichotomy that we continue to see in all court decisions relating to possession and personal possession for the purposes of trafficking. And we risk that same language coming into play when we talk about decrim. So I hope that answers your question, Alex. And I can also type it into the chat for folks that would prefer to read it.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I would like to move on to a question from Craig. I am interested in reducing or eliminating constraints on the use of psychedelics for therapeutic or conscious raising purposes in the downtown East Side community. There is growing momentum based on substantial research confirmation for their effective use for PTSD, depression, death preparation enhancement, and addiction. Is the group giving this matter any attention? Could you recommend any groups or other resources which might have been of value for me? So I'm gonna guess this question is more directed to maybe Caitlin or Garth.
Go ahead, Garth.
Oh, I was just gonna say I don't really know anything about that. Like, I've just treated my PTSD with heroin. So I don't know.
Fair enough. I think what they're trying to look for is like, is there any way we can get safe supply of psychedelics? Which I haven't seen any come out yet, but maybe you guys would have more information on that.
I would suggest looking to MAPS Canada, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Scott Bernstein, who used to be with Canadian Drug Policy Coalition, is now the ED there, so would maybe be able to point you in the right direction, Craig. Thanks for the question.
Perfect. The next question.
I think actually this raises one point. You know, I think like Vandu, for example, we have lots of experience with up, down, and side, and less experience with psychedelics and less experience with party drugs. Although we've all done like most of the pharmacy worth of stuff over our lives, but and it's not like necessarily picking and choosing. And people have sort of said, well, why this focus on like heroin and coke or whatever for so many years? And it's really, to me, it's probably a triage. It's just about what is the subject of most criminalization. Like what do people get arrested and hunted for most, and what's causing the ODs and the deaths and stuff like that. So like I'm glad that other people are taking that up in the movement, but I know that you know, I have heard people saying, why is this treated like an afterthought? Caitlin and I just came from this meeting this morning I was telling you about, and Health Canada had asked the province to include in its application, I guess, MDMA. So some discussion about that has started, and you know, I don't know where it goes. We don't have good information about how much quantities people are carrying around at Bandu of stuff that's not like up, down, or side, really. So, but yeah, it's like, I don't think people are not caring. And I mean, I think it's just like the degree of criminalization and lethalness is what's driving a lot of it.
Thank you, Garth.
Sorry. So, interesting enough, this came up when Toronto was looking about what their submission should be. And in the end, we decided it should be all drugs, everything, no exceptions. Weed, well, weed's already thing, but you know, meth, psychedelics, stimulants, everything was going to be on the board. And I remember the first meeting we had with the city and the stupid cop who I mentioned before, whose name I won't tell you because I really don't like the man. But anyway, and I remember he was there and he basically was saying, you know, the police didn't think it should be all drugs. Well, of course, you're not going to think it's going to be all drugs. But, you know, we realized, I think the Toronto working group realized that it had to be all drugs. Because the minute you start separating drugs, then you start getting a hierarchy of what is good, quotation marks, and what is bad, et cetera, et cetera. And that just deals into the whole myth and discrimination process that, you know, so many people have when it comes to drugs. And I mean, the real reason why we're doing this is to try to make everybody realize that drugs are not necessarily bad. You know what I mean? I mean, let's be honest. Most of the people who use frigging drugs never ever end up in a hospital. They don't overdose. But there are also reasons behind that, because they have housing, they have insurance, they have good health, they have jobs, etc., etc., etc. So we also wanted to look at and to take that whole thing into account as well, that the social determinants of health and all of those other factors do correlate to how somebody's substance use and the enjoyment of their substance use, and they're not ended up in the hospital overdosing comes back. So I think that's something that I really wanted to point out. And then on the whole issue of the, back to the whole issue of the police, again, what we found was the police don't lay one charge, okay? Let's be honest, okay? In my bad days, not so long ago, when I was arrested, the police never just laid one specific charge for what I was doing. They laid a plethora of charges, with the idea being that, you know, if you were on the streets, you would plead to some just to get the damn shit over with, go to jail, get it over with and come out. So that is also something that we want to get away from. And one of the things that we actually put into our submission is that there are going to be very clear guidelines for what the police can do in laying charges, specifically what those charges can be and the why of those charges. And this was something we really had to put down to make clear in our submission. And then on the other factor is, I remember telling a cop once, I basically said, if you would stop fucking around and interdicting drugs, then we wouldn't have this fucking problem. But every time you go and make a big bust, you take shit off the market. You know what I mean? And that's not helping anybody. I mean, I look at years ago when I was doing cocaine, it was amazing cocaine. I still have dreams about that stuff. But now it's pure crap. Why? Because of the interdiction. Like, so just leave our fucking drugs alone. You know what I mean? Seriously. Thank you.
Given people's rapidly rising tolerance as fentanyl has saturated drug markets and some waves of carfentanil, is there not a risk of even getting decently highly threshold amounts of these amounts becoming quickly out of date within a few years? Is there a way of structuring in periodic revisions of threshold amounts into demands around this, similar to what I think Colin was saying about those being set regionally, or other strategies? Who would like to answer?
I can.
Garth? Perfect.
Yeah. Both of the proposals that I've been witnessing going through, like the Vancouver and the British Columbia one, they do have this evaluation component to it where you're going to have to continuously check in to see how it's doing. I think the authorities and the cops are thinking, we want to check on the harms that decrim could be causing and all the innocent young high school students who will turn into raging dope fiends because the law has changed. But we're probably going to use it to continually push for higher thresholds. But that's a concern too, that the drug supply is changing so fast. I mean, fentanyl totally took over. Benzodope is it's taken over. And that's not even on the radar of these decrim proposals. So thanks.
And I just want to say again, like, if you guys want to answer a question live, you guys don't need to use your camera. You don't have to, no face, no name if you don't want to. It can be totally anonymous, and no question is a dumb question ever. But I would also like to say, there's a hand. Yep. There, Caitlin, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to add something to Garth's answer in response to that question, and just note that the market, because it's demand driven, is always going to adapt and morph alongside any policies that we put in place that aim to curb demand, right? So the result of imposing low thresholds can have all sorts of ripple effects on purchase and supply in the illicit market, precisely because it's an illicit market. That's how it works, because it's driven by demand. So all the more reason to ensure either that we don't have thresholds, or that threshold quantities are high enough to protect even folks who use the highest quantity or purchase the highest quantity at one time. It's all the more reason to ensure that this policy protects everyone and gives legal protection to everyone, because without that, again, the market will adapt.
Xandia, est-ce que tu as un commentaire pour cette question?
Oui, et c'est peut-être un petit peu plus large que seulement les seuils acceptables. Et parce que, en fait, je vois le cas Ellis comme un peu une porte ouverte vers une avancée là, de la réflexion à ce sujet-là. Et peut-être que je me trompe, et là-dessus, j'inviterai Caitlin et Garth à venir préciser ou ajuster ma pensée. Mais par contre, c'est quand même un jugement qui a tenu en compte le contexte actuel plutôt que de se baser sur, disons, une jurisprudence qui était dépassée par rapport à l'actualité et tout ce qui entourait la présence et la vente de fentanyl. Alors, j'avais envie de souligner et de lancer un peu la question aussi à mes copanélistes en ce sens-là pour entendre leurs réflexions.
Oui, je veux entendre les autres commentaires sur ça aussi. Et je veux dire une autre question pour toi aussi, Sandhya. C'est le marché noir accentue les inégalités sociales et aggrave le problème de consommation. Le marché noir. Non. Les revendeurs de substances doivent s'approvisionner à quelque part. Cela pourrait être un ou des gros sites communautaires pour s'assurer de la qualité et du meilleur prix. L'approvisionnement est la clé de voûte pour aider les consommateurs et sous-consommateurs. Qu'en pensez-vous?
Liv, est-ce que tu souhaites que je réponde à la question maintenant? Tout à l'heure, je lui ai fait référence déjà, mais est-ce qu'on passe à Kathleen?
On peut aller à Caitlin. Je m'excuse.
OK, et je vais revenir après.
OK. What role have you noticed police taking up in decriminalization conversations, and what role, if any, do you see for them? What is realistic?
Is this a question for me?
No, I'm going to come back to you on the other question. So if anyone wants to respond to this question, they can go ahead.
What role could police take up in well, okay, so the reality is that I think anywhere where there has been any push for decriminalization, police have been involved in any country. I mean, I was just looking at the stats in Australia, which are freaky. The police have been involved. But what I think it is it's there. The police are there because they are the quote protectors of society. That's what they're supposed to be deemed to be. And drugs have been vilified over the years, and police have been used on all occasions to either to interdict, arrest, or prosecute the people who are using substances. So because of, and you might think I'm stepping aside here, but I think it's important for us to come back to it. Because of the George Floyd murder and the subsequent Black Lives Matter renaissance, we now have a different vision of what police need to do, okay, in so many ways. One, we want to get them away from actually going to overdose concerns. Overdose calls. It shouldn't be cops responding to that. Okay, I mean, what the fuck is the cop gonna do? Half of them don't even know what the fuck narcon is, So I mean, so really, I think we have to be realistic there. But we also, that's led to a broader conversation on defunding the police and transferring funding from the police to better address people who use drugs, overdoses, mental health issues. So from speaking from the Toronto Decrim project, we have basically tried to limit police as to what they can and cannot do. So that is part of why in our submission, we are actually calling for literally a set of laws or regulations that police can, and that's the only way that police will be able to interact with people who use drugs. And I think this is what we need to start doing as an extension of the defund police, the decriminalization process, just to make sure that they're limited in what they can and cannot do. Apart from that, I really don't like them, just to be honest with you. But that's just me. That's just me. Okay.
100%. What's the role of police on a decrim committee?
Yeah.
They shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one role for police in all of this, is to stand down, go home, call in sick, leave us alone. It's like a conflict of interest for them to even show up at these things, right? They get huge police budgets out of fucking with us. So of course they're going to try and get in this committee and do everything they can to defend their police budgets, to try and make a bigger role for them or keep their power after decriminalization. They shouldn't be there. There's no point. And in fact, they turned this all, the role of the police is, in Vancouver, the police chief held the pen. He was the most powerful voice in the whole thing. In the province, we've managed to sort of make a coalition where we've won everybody to the drug user perspective, except the police. So we've isolated them, but they're still having a huge influence. And I just think they shouldn't be there.
So to get back to the question that we originally had for Caitlin, I have it in English. Resellers get their supplies from somewhere. It could be one or more community wholesalers to ensure the quality and the best price. Supply is to help is helping consumers and non-consumers. What do you think?
So I think I'm understanding the question. In the context of a currently illicit market, the role of dealers and suppliers that do operate in that market is especially important. When we villainize them, we are basically excusing the role that the state and law enforcement are playing in creating that illicit supply in the first place. So, and again, I'm not sure I understood the question, but the point that I want to make is that anyone who is providing substances against the backdrop of an illicit market needs to be supported rather than punished, because people are always going to use drugs. There's always going to be demand. And so long as there's no regulated supply, then we need to look at what existing supply there is and how we can make that supply safer, whether it's by testing or improving relations between client and dealer. Again, not sure I understood the question, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, you got it. You've nailed it on the head pretty well, I think. I would like to go to another question. This is from Anonymous. As someone who works with people who use drugs but has little ability to lobby government directly, how best can I support our people who use drugs in regards to thresholds?
I can tackle
Perfect.
that. So I don't know what city you're in, and I don't know where you're calling. You're anonymous, but my recommendation is that chances are in your city there are drug user groups. So for example, in Toronto, there is TRA, which is Toronto Harm Reduction Alliance. There's CAPUD, which is the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs. There's the Ontario Association of People Who Use Drugs, Peel Regional, Peel Drug Users Union. There are numerous of us. What I would recommend, our meetings are open. Join one of those meetings just to hear what we are saying. I think that's a good place to start. The other place to start is to ask your people who use drugs what support they would like from you. And I find people don't do this. We don't ask, because in so many cases we feel that we know, or we think we know, what supports they need. And what you might think they need might actually not be what they actually want. So I think it's really critical, especially if you say you work with people who use drugs. Ask them what supports they need. Ask them how you can use whatever power you have to better align with what they require. Join marches, write letters. I know we're trapped in COVID times, but there are also a lot of conversations like the one we're having here today on Zoom, with Zoom meetings. Connect as much as you can. And the other thing, if you can, get the people who use drugs that you want to support, get them on these meetings too. Therefore, you can hear what they say, because you'll find that we are more open when we're all together. You know, when we know we have that support, they might be more willing to speak and talk. That's what I would recommend. I hope that helps.
That's a very clear and concise answer, and very honestly, you just need to get out there and start advocating and getting involved with our communities, you know. Sandia, est-ce que tu as un commentaire?
Oui, mais en fait, j'aime beaucoup la partie de la réponse de Colin qui invite les gens à questionner également sur les besoins avant de proposer des réponses. C'est quelque chose que j'essaie d'appliquer le plus systématiquement à moi-même aussi. Je peux me tromper parfois, mais je trouve que c'est un enseignement fort important. L'autre élément que je voulais ramener, pour le dire en français, c'est qu'au Québec, il y a également plusieurs groupes, d'usagers, des associations d'usagers, des groupes communautaires également qui impliquent, les personnes qui font usage de drogue et vous êtes, bienvenus. Toutes les paroles sont souhaitées pour, mettre, ensemble les forces et donc, n'hésitez pas à y faire référence. Ici, l'Association québécoise pour la promotion de la santé des utilisateurs et utilisatrices de drogue, l'AQP Sud. Et voilà, c'est dans le chat. Alors, c'est une invitation.
Yeah, if also guys, if you guys want to connect with any local drug initiatives or drug policy or any like drug user groups, if you want to reach out to Shay is in the chat right now. If she can help connect you with those groups, so you can find a community to like start doing activism work with them. I'm going to move on to another question. I'm interested in hearing from panelists on therapeutics and the medicalization of drug use as an alternative to criminalization. It seems that medicalization of drug use could have terrible effects if used as the state's main rationale for decrim, regulation. Would anyone have any comments on that?
I can start us off and maybe others would want to jump in. But yeah, I mean, if the goal of the state is to continue to control and strip the autonomy of people who use drugs, which it is, then any lens can be used to justify that control. So we've simply moved from a criminal justice response to something called a public health approach, which is code for medicalizing people who use drugs and continuing to control them through other means that seem more sympathetic or compassionate on the outside, but can be just as devastating and adverse to people's health and safety as criminalization in the first place. So it's kind of a slippery slope, because I think for a long time when we've been talking about decriminalization, we've said, no, it's not a criminal justice issue. It's an issue of public health. And again, this is the importance of remaining vigilant, because everything we say and advocate will be twisted and used in a different way by the state. So now what we're seeing is basically just a model that calls people who use drugs sick and in need of treatment. Garth and I were just talking before this meeting, where we were talking about the BC model, and the province was basically switching the goal of decriminalization from taking people out of prisons and putting them into treatment. Like, that's what we're seeing happen. So it's a slippery slope, and I think we're always going to run into that problem if we continue to exist under government that wants to punish people who use drugs.
That's very true.
Yeah, I think I'm great points, Caitlin. But I when it comes to one of the things that our societies have always done, we've always medicalized anything that's different. Okay, let's go back to mental health, the poor houses, the poor laws of England. That's where a lot of that started. I think the idea also behind it, and I think this is important, is we also have to remember that the concept of normality in our universe is male, white, heterosexual, able-bodied, Protestant, and working. And once you deviate from any of those, i.e. you're a drug dealer, you're somebody who takes drugs, or somebody who is mentally ill, or somebody who's with disabilities, the system is going to force you, because as far as the system is concerned, it's a disease. You are a diseased person because you are not the norm. So therefore, the system is going to medicate you, okay? And that is the harsh reality of what it has done. We saw this with HIV, because if HIV, with grassroots organizations started to address people living with HIV, the government took over, meds were forced on people. I mean, it became a frigging mess. So what I think we have got to do is we need to realize that this is how the system is geared to respond. This is their natural response because they see it as a disease. And to what Caitlin was saying, when you go from the disease to the public health model, it's really still enacting that medicalization of substance use, which is why when the Toronto did its submission, we tried to step away from the public health model to a more human rights approach. And that's what we're trying to get at, that people who use drugs have the right to use drugs when, where they want, in the capacities they want, as long as it does not affect in a dangerous way somebody else. You know what I mean? So if you want to run around screaming naked in your apartment, that's fine. If you want to run around screaming naked outside the door, well, that's fine too, as far as I'm concerned, but society might not see it the same way. But that's what I'm trying to get at. And, we need, and then the other issue, and I think Caitlin also brought this up, was that medicalized thing also leads to involuntary references to support for the system, where they basically want you to stop using drugs. So we need to make sure that we are trying to get away from that medicalization perspective in every way possible, including when it comes to safe supply. Thank you.
No problem. Je veux aller à Sandhya maintenant.
Oui, et, en fait, toute la propension, en fait, à médicaliser l'approche pour pouvoir offrir des services a posé, en fait, beaucoup d'enjeux également au Québec et notamment dans le développement et la mise sur pied des services de consommation supervisée. En fait, on a, avec un regard, en fait, un regard qui se pose un peu sur le passé, on s'aperçoit à quel point la médicalisation du service a été utilisée en termes d'acceptabilité sociale pour crédibiliser, dans le fond, l'offre de services. Et en bout de ligne, ça a été un piège aussi de mener ce dossier-là dans ce sens parce que ça a fait en sorte que c'est un service qui a été développé dans un modèle qui ne répondait pas nécessairement aux besoins réels des personnes concernées et qui, dans le fond, n'offrait pas l'accueil aussi ouvert et bienveillant qu'il aurait dû offrir. Donc, il faut vraiment faire attention, je pense, à cette optique-là. Et je ne pourrais être plus d'accord avec Colin de dire, misons maintenant sur des services qui sont basés sur les droits, le respect des personnes et l'inclusion dans toutes les étapes des personnes concernées.
I would like to just get to the last question. So I'm going to say it in French first, and then I'm going to repeat it in English. Le marché noir accentue les inégalités sociales et aggrave les problèmes de consommation. Cela nuit au tissu social ainsi que la société en général. Devrait-on ne pas attendre après l'État et créer un système légal dans l'égalité? So the black market accentuates social inequalities and aggravates consumption problems. It harms the social fabric as well as society in general. Should we not wait for the state and create a legal system illegally? Who would like to jump on that?
Bien, peut-être que je peux tenter une première réponse.
Oui.
C'est-à-dire, ce que je comprends de la question, c'est de se dire, bon, les lois sont longues à changer. On a à la fois plus de patience et on ne veut plus attendre parce qu'il y a trop d'impacts négatifs et de drames à tous les jours qui sont vécus. Je pense que, il y a des groupes qui se sont organisés, par le passé pour, créer de tels espaces qui dépassaient les limites de ce que, permettait la loi. Par exemple, encore une fois, j'utilise l'exemple des, services de consommation supervisés, mais, il y a eu des modèles hem, qui ont existé, sans avoir d'exemption et qui ont permis tranquillement, pas vite, de pouvoir, finalement, cheminer avec une diminution des normes et une ouverture plus grande là, pour, pouvoir, soutenir et offrir ce service partout au Canada. Par contre, la préoccupation que j'ai et ma réponse est probablement très incomplète parce que, c'est instinctif, mais c'est aussi de faire attention parce que, si on fait quelque chose qui, n'est pas légal, ben, on peut en vivre les conséquences également. Donc de réfléchir à ces impacts-là qui peuvent être, importants pour les personnes qui seraient, impliquées dans ces initiatives-là qui seraient en dehors du système. Mais alors, c'est, ma réponse, spontanée, à cette question.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
Okay, I'll just add to that. Yeah, in terms of the question of, you know, relying on a state that's not inherently benevolent or good, do we need to create our own sort of legal markets within an illicit one? And I would say, yeah, I mean, all of the progress that we've seen in drug policy has been the result of people who use drugs taking matters into their own hands, breaking unconstitutional laws to ensure that we're taking care of one another. And so in Vancouver, awesome picture image Garth is sharing, because that's just what I was going to say.
I thought so.
There are drug user-led groups like Vandu and Dolph who are obtaining substances from the dark web, testing them, and then redistributing them to the community free of charge. And the result is that people know what substances they're getting, and it's far safer than you know, obtaining a supply perhaps from someone you don't know, don't trust, hasn't been tested. The issue with that, of course, is that every time we host these events or attend these events, everyone is put at tremendous legal risk. Why? For trying to save each other's lives, for trying to obtain a safe supply of drugs. It's absurd that that's what people have to do, is literally put their necks on the line to provide a safe supply. But that is unfortunately how we see change happening in Canadian drug policy.
I'm going to add to that by saying, I am willing to go to jail for my friends to make sure that my friends don't die. It's as simple as that. Okay. And, you know, as Caitlin and Sandra said, nothing that we have today, overdose prevention sites, compassionate clubs, all of those, they did not come from mainstream society. Okay. It was people like us, in many cases, who sat back and said, enough is frigging enough. We're not going to do this shit anymore. And, you know, you assholes with policies and regulations are sitting on your fucking asses. We've told you how to fix this. And I think this is where most of us get really annoyed, because if they listen to us, this could be fixed. It's not confusing. It's not rocket science. We're not trying to build a V2 rocket here. We're just trying to get people the drugs that they want for whatever reasons they want. And again, that's another thing. People use substances for so many damn reasons. I mean, and to deny them this is, to me, is just unconscionable, especially when I hear the people who are talking are sitting in fucking bars having a drink, which are fucking supervised consumption sites. But they are so far removed from reality, they don't think about bar as a supervised consumption site. They think it's a place where they can go pick up chicks or whatever the case is they're going to do. So yeah, I really don't give a damn, okay? Especially as it impacts people of color, people who are Black, Indigenous, and women, which is another group that we forget every now and then, who are heavily impacted by a lot of these laws. And I really think that, you know, we have these platforms, we need to make the best of it. But I'm also going to add that I really think this time, the point of time we're in, is really the time for us to act. Black Lives Matter, the murders, the indigenous things, the residential schools, the pandemic. We're not going to get a chance, an opportunity like this again if we don't act now, okay? I think this is the best time that we can possibly have to push for the laws that we're asking for and to use our allyship to get what we want. Thank you.
Garth, do you want to make a comment?
Oh, I was just like wanting to turn my camera on to nod in so much agreement with what Colin was saying. That's all. I just was
okay.
Like,
well, I'm gonna put
fucking
you on
A.
the spot, anyways. But what is your opinion on the term problematic substance use within the thresholds and necessity realms?
You know, like, it's so fucked up, right? Like, I'm middle-aged, like I'm deep into middle age, man. Like, I turned 50 last year, you know? So like, I've been around before there was nice words for us. You know, like, I was a sex fiend, sex worker, dope fiend, injecting drug user when all those words didn't exist. You know, like, we didn't have a nice way to say sex worker. We didn't have a nice way to say drug user. We didn't have a nice way to describe ourselves. And all the terms came after that. You know, so the nicest one was addict. And when I got on the methadone program, the doctor said, okay, here's your methadone. And after a while, she said, well, you're not addicted anymore. And I said, well, if I stop taking this shit, I'm going to be sick as fuck. And she says, oh yes, but now you're dependent. You're not addicted. Said, well, the difference to me seems to be that one's legal and the other's illegal. Now, I know people have debated this on Twitter and everywhere else for a million years, and I still don't really understand the difference. And people say I have opioid use disorder. And I just, like, you know, after being around this long, I've realized it's not me that's fucked up. It's the rest of the world that's fucked up. Like, sure, I got my problems. Everybody's got problems, right? And so problematic substance use, I mean, once we get all the problematic substance policies out of there, then maybe we can see what's in somebody's life that's a problem for the way they use drugs. How's it affecting their lives that is a problem? But right now, there's so much chaos caused by prohibition, by the cops, by us having to hide, by the contaminated drug supply. There's so much shit happening. I can't even see through all of that to see what would be the actual harm. All I can know is my life has been, when I have my shit together and I'm working, doing everything I want, it's because I have a stable known supply of opioids in my system. When I can't, and I'm broke, and I'm like in shit with the cops and lying to everybody I know, it's because I don't have access to a secure, dependable supply of opioids. It's just been true for my whole life. So, like, what's problematic about me versus the world? I'm like, let's fucking fix the world and stop trying to tell drug users to fix ourselves. And I'll bring the circle back to this question about that problematic substance use being mentioned in decriminalization. This is the problem with having cops on these committees and having the government writing the whole thing, is it's all aimed at us. Decriminalization should be talking entirely about the police's behavior, what they shouldn't fucking do anymore. But these documents are full of, you know, what our path to treatment is, and what the stigma is on us, and how we behave, and what we have in our pockets, and reducing the. If you ask the politicians, they'll say decriminalization is to reduce stigma so that drug users can get to treatment without all these bad ideas obstructing us. Well, fuck that, man. I don't think it's about treatment or health or any of that shit. I just think it's about not having cops in our lives. And so for me, the problematic part of all this is social organization. The problematic part is colonization, is institutional racism, is inflated police budgets, surveillance of our communities. These are systemic forces, is the housing crisis. These systemic forces swing through our lives like fucking wrecking balls. And when there's a wrecking ball coming through your house and breaking the walls, and someone says, well, what do you think? Should we have eggshell white paint or should we have taupe? I have no fucking opinion about that. I'm just like, stop the wrecking ball. That's what decriminalization is. The cops are the biggest wrecking balls around. So like, that's the place to start. And all this turning the table so it's all about our behavior and all on us, to me, that's just gaslighting. But luckily, drug users have really great bullshit detectors because we've been subject to bullshit our whole fucking lives. So a lot of us can see what's happening pretty easily. End of rant. Thank you.
We love your rants, and the chat's going wild right now. So I would also like to ask, apparently there's someone with their hand up who wants to answer a question live. So Craig Hathaway, please, if you're out there and you want to answer a question live. Oh, sorry. Apparently Sandia's hand is up right now first. So we'll go with Sandia first. Elle peut faire son commentaire et après on peut aller à l'autre question.
OK. Alors, je vais prendre la parole, mais j'aurais été très, très, très encline à laisser l'autre personne parler avec plaisir. Je serai brève. En fait, je pense aussi que la question de l'usage problématique, en fait, devrait être aussi beaucoup plus centrée autour de la réflexion de la propre personne. Est-ce que pour la personne, l'usage est dérangeant ou non? Plutôt qu'au système et dans le fond à la société d'accoler cette étiquette-là. Et cette étiquette-là est associée à une stigmatisation qu'on perdure et que l'on nourrit constamment. Donc, l'usage problématique est toujours amplifié par rapport à une réalité qui ne correspond pas du tout à la majorité des usages de drogue. Donc, là-dessus, je pense aussi qu'on a une responsabilité, les associations, par exemple, comme l'Association des intervenants en dépendance du Québec, de aussi mettre de l'avant cette question de l'usage comme étant un peu plus normalisé et répondant à des besoins humains aussi de plaisir, et en le mettant aussi, en l'accolant à des situations d'événements sociaux, un peu comme également l'alcool cohabite très bien là, avec les différents événements et les différentes activités qu'on a dans nos vies. Donc, pour ce type de promotion-là et de sensibilisation, je pense qu'on devrait, les associations, les ONG, avoir une certaine proactivité sur la question également.
Ça, c'est très, très vrai. Il y a des... Oh, we're going to go to answering a question live from Craig Hathaway. Hello, welcome.
All right, thank you very much.
No problem. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm a retired criminologist and sociologist. I'm a 76-year-old white guy. I've been working on the downtown east side for about 15 years, doing a variety of things, including struggling with police over drugs. I'm fascinated by a lot of things that have said. I'm very sympathetic to most of it. I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I think you should pay attention to the developments around psychedelics that are going on now. Some reduction in the Section 56 constraints seems to be moving forward. I'm also very concerned that it's moving into a medicalization model. This is a step to legitimacy, but it's also a barrier to effective community use. For me, the psychedelics not only offer therapeutic possibilities, but also something deeper than that. When I walk up and down Hastings Street between Carroll and Main and beyond, and I've done that in the alleys and on the street for years, I'm just so despondent about the lives that those people are having to live. And I know the role that criminalization plays in all of this, and moral entrepreneurs and political careers and all the rest of that. But I hope that you can see the possibility that psychedelics are going to be a wedge issue. That as more people participate in enhanced death preparation and the broader society comes to understand the power of this modality, and that strategists and tacticians like yourselves understand that it is a modality that can be employed from within the community without medical intervention, to do a lot to relieve some of the suffering that's going on there, and for people who find their dependence or addiction to drugs oppressive, to provide them with a means of transforming that. I'm in no position, although my son has had issues in this area for many years, to try and speak for someone who's in that position. But I'm trying to get a hold of Pivot, and I've got a meeting with them next week, and I'm interested in working with Bandu again, which I did many, many years ago, to see whether or not there's a way to employ this without state oppression within the community for people who choose to use it for the purpose that they want to use it for. It's not just coming in touch with the disaster that's going on in the environment, but also the every lived lives of the people on the streets on Hastings.
Thank you so much, Craig. I just want to ask if the panel wants to say anything on this.
Craig, I totally agree. And that's why when Toronto, as I said earlier, when Toronto did their submission, our decision was to include all drugs, including psychedelics, because I don't think we can limit in any way or form what drugs people are using. It's unrealistic. It's not everybody's just doing coke or whatever the case may be. There's so many fucking drugs out there, and everybody's doing drugs. So, you know, we thought it was absolutely unrealistic for us to limit that. The other group that we also included, which I don't think I've heard anybody mention, was youth. Yeah, that's also in the Toronto submission. And you know, as I said earlier, people use substances for different reasons. And Craig, you mentioned something about enhanced death processes. Yeah, one of the groups that we reached out to was the doulas in HIV for that very reason, to see what their input was going to be. We also reached out specifically to sex workers groups. We tried our best to get everybody to come into this, so that when we did our submission, it covered everybody from what we can think of, and you know, every group would be represented. The issue of problematic use, substance use is a spectrum. We know that, and people can float between what's aggregated use to benign use, and we're all at some point in between on so many levels, and for me, it also depends on what drug I use. With some drugs, I have problems metabolizing and dealing with. With others, it's wonderful. I don't have an issue. So when we start making terms and putting terms like problematic use out there, I mean, let's be serious. The drug with the biggest problematic use right now is fucking alcohol, but that's bloody fucking legal, And I think this is where we need to start re-educating the populations, and make it, because I don't think they quite get it. They don't see the damage that alcohol really causes, because it is legal and, you know, the government tax it. We need to shift that paradigm to let them understand and realize that the other drugs that have been vilified and demonized are really not the drugs that are problematic anymore. You know, and I think that's what we also need to do. So a big education phase is required, shifting that paradigm of how we think about drugs, but also trying to normalize substance use and make people understand that, you know, it's not a big deal, you know? Thanks. Yeah.
No problem. Does anyone have any other comments on this? Because I plan on moving on. Okay, perfect. We're actually going to show the results of our poll that we just had. There we go. So currently, 23% are from BC, 15% from Alberta, 8% from Manitoba, 25% from Ontario. Hello, Ontarians. Saskatchewan, 4%, Quebec, 12%. Hello, everyone from Quebec. Bonjour à tous de Québec.
Fuck la loi.
61% of our participants are female. Hello, ladies. 28% male, 11% queer, 2% agender. Hello, fellow agender folk. 4% gender fluid. 93% are English. Et 22% c'est en français. Hello to all of my other Indigenous baddies. 10% of us are Indigenous. 7% identify as a person of color, and 83% prefer to be referred to as another way. Where are you coming from? 15% being academic, 46% being community or social service. Hello to the one person who is in government. Hello to the non-elected government workers. Health service, 27%. Hello to everyone in health service. And yeah, 1% in law enforcement. I hope this was very, 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 very informational for you. 11% in public health, and other people did not want to disclose their occupation. I'm actually gonna let Shay come on if she wants to, and she was gonna market the next Stimulus Connect.
Sorry about that, Liv. I was the one who was sharing, and then I think you were about to say something, and then I took it away from you. Like a mean
That's okay. That's okay.
I know we're about to wrap up, but I just wanted to let you know, and I think Emery's gonna hook us up on some links, but we did a webinar that was about, I think it was called Make It Queer, Harm Reduction in the Queer Community. I think that's what it was called. No, I didn't look that up, but we promised that we were going to do a follow-up Stimulus Connect that would be a bit more interactive. And so the February one, the month of love and Hallmark, I guess, we are going to do queer harm reduction. So it means we're going to have conversations about the services that the queer community, so that's LGBTQI2S community, have in accessing harm reduction services, because a lot of times we have a lot of heterosexism that leads folks to not be as accessing to the harm reduction services. So I'll just leave that be. And I know Colin and I talked about it a little bit the other day, and we're like so excited to talk about it as folks who are queer. So I'll hand it back to you. Thanks for letting me pop in, Liv.
No problem. I actually have a question, so like that I'm gonna ask all you guys. So I actually am a board director with Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I am a youth who does use drugs pretty damn frequently. And I just want to ask from our lovely panel, like, how are we going to include youth in this conversation? Because like, yeah, like I want to be able to access safe supply. Like I am 22 now, but I'm talking about whenever I was just a young teen, you know, and like like how, like, you know, like my cannabis use was medicalized, right, when I was younger. So like, how are we going to keep not like youth safe, but like, how are we going to like give them the resources that they need? Whoever wants to go, floor is open. Go.
So, okay, so I think I can go first. So there are a number of organizations I'm from Toronto, so there are a number of organizations there are a number of organizations in Toronto that deal specifically with youth and substance use and LGBTIQ youth as well. I am more than willing to offer and make sure that those organizations are invited to the next meeting, and we can reach out to them and see if they, I mean, I'm sure they have members who might be willing to talk under the concept of anonymity. And I think we can address that here on this platform. So I'm more than willing to do that if that helps. But we do need to hear from you. There's no doubt about that. Okay. Thanks.
Do you guys have any like professional like opinions like on it, or like sort of how we would take it in sort of policy? But I know we should definitely hear from the youth first. But I'm just wondering if there's any sort of comments that you guys would have on it. Caitlin, I saw you on mute.
I think Sandia had her hand up before me, so.
Okay. Oh, whoever wants to go.
Okay, I was just gonna say, yeah, following on Colin's comment, I mean, one of the practices that Pivot has in place is that when we meet with government or are invited to meetings, it's always on the condition that people who use drugs are there as well. If they're excluded from the conversation, then we won't be attending either. And I think that that has to be the mentality for anyone who's engaging in drug policy conversations. And increasingly, that same extension needs to include youth who use drugs, because so often, and it's partly because we're talking about different, there's the Criminal Code and Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, and then there's a separate governing legislation for youth. But I think too often that gets used as an excuse by government who don't want to decriminalize youth to say, oh, we can't even touch that because it's a different piece of legislation. And that's not actually the case. We have all sorts of policies that apply to adults and youth alike, and decriminalization should be no different. Sorry, someone is knocking on my door. So I would just say, that needs to be policies when we are sitting at the table and going into those meetings saying, we need people who use drugs and we need youth who use drugs to be there too. So I'm just gonna duck out for a sec, thanks.
Sandia.
Oui, bien, c'est un peu le même argument que je voulais mettre de l'avant, dans ce sens où, à travers nos différentes activités d'advocacy ou de développement de programmes, ben, c'est aussi un souci important à intégrer d'avoir une représentativité, autant au niveau de l'usage de substances que de l'âge ou que de différentes strates de personnes. Et ben, là-dessus, ben, au Québec, on a plusieurs associations là, qui sont non basées sur l'âge, par exemple, et l'AQP Sud est un bon exemple de cette position. Bon, il y a différents groupes communautaires aussi là, qui offrent la parole et l'implication aux jeunes. Mais malheureusement, en tout cas de notre côté, en ce qui concerne par exemple tout l'encadrement légal du cannabis, on a fait des reculs importants au Québec. Hein. On est passé d'un âge légal de 18 ans à un âge légal de 21 ans. On est encore abasourdi de cette situation, mais on voit quel paternalisme, si je peux utiliser ce terme, il peut y avoir lorsqu'il est question, en fait, d'inclure et de prendre en considération les besoins des personnes qui sont plus jeunes ou mineures.
J'aime la stratégie du Québec parce que toutes les personnes pour utiliser les centres pour accéder les harm reduction. Aussi,
Oui.
lastly, does anyone have anything they want people to hear today. I'm gonna solo. I might actually pick on another person again, Garth. If you want to like go off on something or something that's really heavy on your heart, or anyone else, raise your hand and just let it out. Because like people need to hear like what's heavy on your heart right now.
I think I used up all my ranting coupons today. So
But we're giving you another one.
Yeah, I guess I come back to the theme of knowing our enemy, even though the enemy changes how they talk. And I mean people in the political leadership. I don't mean public servants like rank and file civil servants or public servants who often are trying to do the best they can under very bad circumstances. I mean the political leadership, the prime ministers and ministers, like Justin Trudeau, who recently appointed a Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and gave a mandate letter to her that did not include anything about the overdose crisis, harm reduction, anything. Like, you can control F that document. You won't find any of those words that we would look for. So it was kind of strange. I think we got to know who our enemy is, because the drug war is changing. When I was a lot younger, the drug war was very aggressive. The rhetoric of the drug war was very aggressive. It was very Nancy Reagan, very just like total 100% society consensus that we are pariahs and what we do is terrible. Now it's just like, oh, you're sick people. You're not criminals or moral failures. You're sick and we need to fix you. So it's like a different kind of approach. And I just think that instead of declaring war on us as they have before from the capital cities of our provinces and our country, they just sit there and they decide who's going to live and who's going to die. Because Health Canada does modeling that shows how many of us will die if what policies are implemented. So they are making choices that involve our death. It's not a force of nature, it's a force of policy. And so when we look at what the state is doing, this is necropolitics. And they're not just doing it to us, and we're not the first. This country was founded on this sort of thing. And the unmarked graves, the thousands of unmarked graves around residential schools across Canada, shows that it's been necropolitics from the beginning. And drug users are down the road on that long, sad list. But it's expanding. And I think other Canadians are starting to learn what it's like, or other people who are living in what's called Canada are learning what it's like. A lot more people died from COVID than was necessary. A lot of people in British Columbia have died from environmental emergencies over the last year, climate change emergencies. The heat dome killed 500 people here. And we're going to just keep seeing more of it. So there are governments that are deciding who's going to live and who's going to die. And they've decided thousands of people dying is okay, that they can live with it, and not just us. So we have to close ranks with the people who we've been traditionally allied with in the harm reduction movement, with people who we've joined forces with on the defund the police movement, with groups that maybe we haven't always worked with, trade unions, environmental groups. I mean, we're all basically looking down the barrel of capitalism, late stage capitalism, as a death cult. It doesn't care if we die, doesn't care if the planet dies, and runs a country like Canada for the enrichment of primarily of 80 families who own the majority of wealth, perhaps more than half in this country. And the rest of us come second, and sometimes not at all. So I think understanding the drug war as having entered this phase of nice words and necropolitics instead of Nancy Reagan just say no is key to figuring out how to fight. And that when we're all left to die, we can all die separately or try to live together, survive together. So I guess I really used my coupon there. Thanks.
Caitlin, do you want to go? I thought I saw your hand up, but
I don't know. I was just fist pumping Garth.
cool.
I'm also laughing because he was like, I don't have it left in me. I don't have anything else to say.
And I'm just like, hey, Garth, haven't seen you in a while. All right, I think we're just about to wrap up. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate everyone's engagement today. The energy in the room was absolutely amazing. I just want to send out a thank you to all of our panelists. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here. I'd like to thank you to my wonderful team at Stimulus as well. Shay, Anne-Marie, Savannah, Sanjana, and Nick. Y'all are rock stars. You guys, we just pulled this off. And I think next is and also after there's going to be a little 1-minute feedback survey that we want you to fill out. If you can fill that out, that'd be awesome. Your feedback is appreciated to make these events as cool as possible. So if you like it, then please give us some feedback. Anne-Marie, are you okay to do the closeout?
Yeah, I can see my computer freezing at this end. I don't know if it's doing that to you guys.
It
No, we're
isn't,
good.
and we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so it's just me. So I just want to take a moment to reflect and think about everybody who's lost their lives or, has gone through and lost people, parents, families, children, people that are out there struggling. And to take a minute and reflect and remember them, and to know that we're still fighting, and we will continue to fight for them. And we are going to continue to fight against the poison drug supply and fight against the war on drug users. So if we could just take a moment to think about everybody and reflect on all the amazing stuff that we heard today, that would be wonderful.